Hi there, it's Ian here, and you're watching Grumpy Opinions, the show where I'm going to tell you all about what I think of films, TV shows, games, and life in general. Let's get on with the show. Outlander is a Starz TV series about Claire, a mid-20th century nurse flung back in time to the late 18th century, who fell in love with Jamie Fraser, a Scottish Highlander, shortly before the Battle of Culloden. She travelled back to her hometown, pregnant, confused, saying goodbye to her love and her past. Episode 13, Dragonfly and Amber, is a season finale of Series 2, and it's the final piece of the puzzle of all the questions raised at the start of the season, both in the 1960s and in the 1740s. It opens in the 1960s when a grown-up Roger Wakefield, the wee adopted son of Reverend Wakefield, during his father's wake. When in the midst of his grief, a wee hot ginger lass catches his eye wandering round the manse. Turns out that she's actually Claire's daughter Brianna. Remember the one we saw as a wee snaggletooth bairn halfway through the season? Claire herself turns up, and she's barely aged a day, and seems to be going from the rogue off X-Men look. And the pair of them are in Britain since old Frank has died a wee while ago, and they heard about the Reverend's passing, so they came up to Scotland to pay their respects. So later on, Roger and Claire are having a wee dram, and they have a chat about dead loved ones. And everything starts looking up a little bit, because Claire heads off to places like Lallybroch and looking into ownership records and family histories, and Roger, he gets to go sightseeing with wee cute Bree, taking around lots of sights and touristy places, and they bond over their mutual love of history. And then she lets slip that her old man Frank and Roger's dad used to exchange letters, and that she read something in one that made her worry that there was some big secret. And there's a tension between Bree and Claire because she really loved her dad, Frank, the one who adopted her. But Claire's never gotten over losing Jamie, and she's kept the secret that Jamie was actually Bree's real father and that Frank only was really taking her in. So Bree can plainly tell that something's not quite right. So her and Roger go to investigate this strange mystery, and while he's away raking through boxes, she wanders into a Free Scotland rally run by a strangely charismatic ginger girl. It's Galis, or Gillian as she's known in the 1960s, and she's all fire and brimstone and Free Scotland kind of stuff. But then it's back to the records, and Roger cringingly singing like this song about rats in his attic. No, really, that happens. And then they eventually find the newspaper clipping about Claire and the fairies. Meanwhile, Claire's off looking at the Culloden Museum and greeting at the grave marker of fallen Frasers on the moor, and when she gets back, Brianna ends up going through her like a knife, because she's done the maths and figures out that she can't really be Frank's daughter, because Claire was missing at that point, and Claire admits it, and she's desperate to tell Bree all about it, although Bree's furious, and Roger walks in with something he's found, but he ends up getting roped into staying and hearing the story, and beside all the temper tantrums, eventually Claire ends up telling them both the entire truth, the whole time travel story and everything. And naturally, Bree and Roger both think that she's either lying or they're mad, and it all gets a bit messy. So, a few whiskies down the pub later, Roger tells Bree that he's found some evidence that there was actually a Claire Beecham Fraser in the past, but they both agree that it's all probably just nuts, but maybe they should keep an open mind. And Claire's found the brochure from the rally and goes off looking for Gaius, but all she finds is her depressed alcoholic husband, and Gaius has left him after getting right into folklore and history and spending all his money doing these courses and things. So Claire ends up half-inching his notebook when she finds that it's full of all sorts of Donnie Darko-style time travel stuff, and of course, Gaius at the same time just bumped into Bree and Roger and told them that she's away off forever, which isn't at all strange or suspect, but they're both quite drunk by now, so probably don't worry about it. Anyway, spurred on by that same whiskey, Bree finally listens to her mum talk about Jamie, and there's a wee bit of an understanding between them. And then they go to Roger and ask about Gaius, and Claire drops the second parental bombshell by telling them that Gaius is actually Roger's ancestor, and that Gaius is going to go through the stones. And Bree's about ready to roll her eyes clean out of her head, and Roger convinces her that it might actually be a good way to make her mum face up to her delusion. So off they go, and they arrive just as mad Gaius is setting fire to her hopefully already dead husband. Ugh. And then they see her vanish into the stones, and Bree and Claire can hear the buzzing of the stones, and Bree understands that it's actually all true, and this is really the last place her mother ever saw her father alive. Her real father, Jamie. And Jamie, last time we saw him was the night before Culloden. In the cold, misty morning, he's trying one last time to convince Charlie to avoid the battle, but Chuck just calls him his own personal doubting Thomas and dismisses him. So Claire comes to him with one last plan. See, she wants to slip poison to the prince's tea, killing him but saving Scotland in the meantime. However, Dougal ends up overhearing them, and he attacks him like a madman, and in the struggle, and with Claire's help, they manage to kill Dougal, but then they get seen by Rupert standing over the dead body, and they've no chance of covering it up, so Jamie just asks Rupert to give him 2 hours to settle his affairs before he'll give himself up to justice. Jamie ends up signing over Lallybroch to Ian and Jenny, and then sends Fergus away with the deeds, and he tells Murtagh to send the Fraser men home so they don't have to die in the battle, and to go with them. And he agrees to the first part but not to the second, because Murtagh's loyal, and he wants to fight beside Jamie, knowing that Jamie would rather die in fair battle than get hung as a murderer. And then Jamie drags Claire away from the camp, telling her that he's got to get her safe, and telling her to make true her promise that she would go back to Frank, because Jamie knows that she's pregnant. And so does she, but she hasn't said anything yet. So they ride off to the stones at Cragnadoon, and she can hear the buzzing, but he can't. And Jamie touches the stone and realises he can't go back with her. So they say their goodbyes and they kiss, and well, it wouldn't be Outlander if there wasn't time for one last roll in the heather. But then they hear the roar of the cannon, and the battle's clearly underway. So after that, she gives him her dragonfly and amber, and he gives her his father's ring. And he leads her up to the stone and holds her hand up against the rock. Meanwhile, back in 1968, Roger's come back having called the police, and now that they all know that it's true about the time travel, he drops the final bombshell of the season. You see, he found evidence that one Jamie Fraser survived the Battle of Culloden and escaped the British Army. And Claire's so shocked, and she looks up at the stones just as the sun is rising. It's actually rising really, really fast for Scotland, because I mean we're quite north of the equator. It takes a long time for the sun to rise. Anyway, we know that Claire is going to be back safe with Jamie again. Well, that was the season finale, and an extended length episode as well. So what did I think? Well, I think it was an absolute cracker of an episode. In fact, more than that, it was almost like a wee mini movie in itself. And I really loved the fact that it was genuinely interesting to see what was going on, and that the late 1960s itself was beautifully realised. I mean, they really went to town on it. The structure was also interesting, as I mean, we spent a couple of days in 1968, and that was off-cut, with a few frantic hours spent in 1745. And although I did describe it in two chunks in the recap, I mean, I did that for clarity. I mean, in the episode, it was all cleverly intercut together, like with bits here and there. And I found that, frankly, by this point, most of the show in 1968 with Bree, Roger and Claire was actually really interesting. I mean, probably because we've had so many episodes of Jamie and Claire and Culloden and Hungry Troops and Rain and Mud that it was quite nice to step away from that a little bit, and also tying up all the mysteries of everything that was set up at the beginning of the season. And it's really interesting because the book essentially tells you all of this Roger, Bree and Claire stuff in the first few chapters before jumping back to them arriving in France. I mean, that was as far as I got, because I was actually listening to the audiobook and I just kind of gave up at that point, mainly just because the actress who was performing the audiobook just kept having Bree going, "Mama, Mama," all the time. And it really annoyed me actually after a while. I mean, there was other things as well, but I just kind of gave up on it at that point. But anyway, on to the characters. Bree and Roger, the new ones. Roger's absolutely lovely. I mean, what a lovable, nice bloke. He's really well acted. He's educated and kind, affable, but never boring, and he's sensible without being strict. I mean, he's clearly a bit of a catch, and there's no reason that Bree wouldn't be interested. I mean, hell, if Claire wasn't so hung up on Jamie, she'd probably be interested herself. And I really like how they've done it. Whereas Bree, on the other hand, came across as a lot younger, a bit brattier, and quite snippy, with a rebellious streak that makes sense, seeing as she's supposed to be, from the same blood as Claire and Jamie, so she's going to be headstrong. And I thought it was actually quite good. Although there were a couple of line readings that felt a wee bit stilted, but I would put that down rather than anything wrong with the acting, that mainly just because the actress is actually not. She's actually from the UK, she's not Bostonian, and it could be that the accent was giving her a bit of trouble. But still, I quite liked her, and I think it'll be really interesting to see how her character goes on. It was also really lovely to see Gaius again, and to have a wee goodbye to Graham McTavish, Grant Rourke and Andrew Gower, who've all been absolutely fantastic this season. I mean, I've no doubt if we'll see any of them again. I mean, well, certainly not in the case of Graham McTavish, as Dougal's properly dead after getting stabbed in the guts. I mean, McTavish has always been fantastic as Dougal. I mean, for 2 seasons he's been a sort of secondary antagonist, but also a sort of useful side figure with his own agenda. And it's a real shame to see him go, but I think he played it to the hilt, and the character has reached the end of his arc quite nicely. And it was also, as I said, it was nice to see a nice wee send-off and a wee final mark me from Bonnie Prince Charlie, because Andrew Gower's been really good as him this season. And Grant Rourke, I mean, he's maybe still alive. I mean, I don't know. He'll maybe survive and actually turn up in later stories, but it'd be quite nice. He's always been a really good character, a nice, solid actor, so that would be good. And it's really great to have seen Claire played as an older woman, with Katrina giving it a lot more world weariness and maturity. And I really like how they had to have her face up to Brianna in a realistic way, which went some way to making her feel forgivable for all the offhandness she'd been to Frank, during the time in intervening. Because we know that that wasn't happy. And at the beginning of the season, you really felt for him rather than from her, because she just came off as cold and unkind. But anyway, this is Grumpy Opinions, and you all know that I'm never happy. Well, actually, I pretty much am. There's not actually much I had wrong with this episode. In fact, the wee nitpicks I had are really just that, nitpicks. I mean, there was a little bit too much of the, isn't this awfully convenient, like Dougal happening to eavesdrop just at the wrong moment, and Rupert just happening to walk in straight after that, but not soon enough to get involved in the fight, but short enough afterwards to find them still standing over the dead body with a knife out. And Gaius just happening to meet Bree, and then just happening to bump into them in the pub and then mention that she's off that night, which just happened to be the same night she was off. I mean, it was all a little bit too convenient, but you expect that. I was also a wee bit cringy at Roger's Rat song. I mean, I've never heard of that. Maybe that's the thing. I've never heard of it. It's strange, and the whole thing was just a little bit too. And anyway, also I was a bit concerned that there seems to be a setup of another Leary situation with his housekeeper Fiona. I mean, the way she was like gawping at him, like she was quite obviously making big moon eyes at him, going, "Oh, I love you." But anyway, I mean, maybe the modern day is a bit different from that, but that just doesn't seem to happen in real life very often. I mean, maybe I'm just not paying attention, but I don't normally see people wandering around getting randomly friend zoned by hangers on all the time like the plague. Anyway, another random point is that I do get it. Katrina Balfe is amazingly gorgeous. She's an incredibly gorgeous woman, and I know they don't want to make her look ugly or anything. And they probably don't want to stress themselves by piling on loads of makeup and realizing they'll have to do that from now on. I mean, it's kind of the same as how they decided not to like cut Tyrion's nose off in Game of Thrones and instead just went for a wee scar across the Peter Dinklage's face. So they probably don't want to have to put tons of like wrinkles and things on her. But she doesn't look 20 years older. I mean, she acts it well enough, and the 1960s mum hairdo with the subtle grey streaks do help a bit. But honestly, there's a couple of moments in this where I genuinely reckon she actually looked a bit younger than the actress who was playing Brianna. Now, maybe that's just me, but it really felt that way. I mean, what do you think? Look at this. What do you think? Anyway, that's been Outlander Season 2. I mean, I could probably talk about this for hours, but there's not really much need. I can maybe do another video on it later, like before Season 3. But on the whole, I think this has been a vast improvement on Season 1. I think it's been a much more together season. And the season of 2 parts, especially, with the whole France section and the whole Scotland section, really feeling like separate halves of the story. And overall, I do think it has been an improvement. They've tightened up a lot of things, and they've definitely decided to cut a lot of chaff out the story. And it does leave it on a cliffhanger, which they had originally apparently planned to do. I did remember hearing that originally the opening of the first episode with her coming through the stones was actually meant to be how the first season ended, rather than with them just sailing off on the ship. But I do like the fact they've left this one a cliffhanger, especially now that they've already greenlit 2 more seasons. Yes, we're officially getting 2 more seasons. So there's going to be a lot more fun and excitement with Clan Fraser and Clan Mackenzie and the various ancestors. So until next time, I've been Ian. And these have been my grumpy opinions.